What's up guys, TechLab here. Now the results of our recent £65 retro build-up are in, and I was pretty proud of the little system that I put together. It was a lot of fun to do and it brought back a lot of memories, but was it actually enough to win the competition? Well, let's find out. Now, for those of you that didn't watch the previous video, and for those of you that can't be bothered to go back and watch it, I was actually challenged by another tech YouTuber, WnDTech,
hello,
to build a system. The systems that we were building and then competing together didn't have to actually be built from retro parts themselves, but they did need to be competing in retro games. Those games are some of the retro games that we knew as kids and some of our favorites, as well as a few synthetic benchmarks, something a little bit new and something a little bit old as well. The catch to all of this though was that we only had £65 to spend, and at the start of it, it all went horribly wrong for me. I actually purchased a system that I expected to just throw a graphics card in and hopefully it would compete very well, but the system didn't work. So I started completely from scratch and I built this. I built this completely from scratch from all the different components. I managed to source the motherboard and the CPU, the RAM, the storage device, the graphics card, and I pretty much did it well within budget. The system I managed to put together was using an AMD Phenom II X4 850, a pretty old CPU now running on an AM3 slot. The motherboard was a Gigabyte GA-M68MT-S2P, a very long name there, but it was probably a very basic board back in the day. It came with one stick of 8GB of DDR3, and that was from Team Group, so at least it was branded. I then purchased a brand new Patriot 120GB SATA SSD, because, you know, we really do need to make sure we're on SSDs now. And then for the graphics card, I managed to pick up the AMD Radeon RX 460 2GB. All of that actually came to a very decent price, and then of course we came to other things that really do cost a little bit, particularly when you're coming into shipping. For the case, I managed to pick up this unit here. I have no idea what it is, but it just looked really retro and I thought it went really well with the theme. It is one of these old style horizontal mounted cases, but it's got plenty of space in it and lots of airflow. I can even fit up to 2 DVD drives if I really wanted to, as well as an SD card reader or a floppy drive. I'm not going to do that, but you could if you wanted to. But overall, I thought the case looked pretty cool. The power supply also came in this case, and we got lucky here because it had already been upgraded to a BeQuiet 300 watt SFX power supply. Not that good for modern gaming really, because most graphics cards will use more than that, but it does come with an 8-pin PCI Express connection. I didn't need it, but that kind of makes it useful for other people if they were trying to build something like that. Overall, I was pretty impressed with my system. It was an all AMD system, so I was taking a bit of a risk here because WnDTech could quite easily beat this with an Intel one, because we all know that AMD wasn't very good back then. But overall, I was pretty impressed with the system. The specifications came out very well, and even though it is an all AMD built system, it performed exceptionally well on those benchmarks. But what did WnDTech build? Well, he went a different route. He went with my original route. He purchased a system and then he just did a couple of upgrades on it, and that system actually came out pretty well. For WnDTech's system, he went with the Intel Core i5-750. Now, that wasn't the original CPU that he had in there. He did have the 650 in there, but he did state that he upgraded it so that he got some true 4-core kind of performance here. Remember, the most demanding game that we actually had to test just required a 4-core CPU, so he was pretty much on par there. For the motherboard, it was unknown. He couldn't really get that much information about it, but it looked pretty decent in the case that he had. For memory, he also had 8GB of DDR3, except he was running it in 4 sticks of 2GB. For storage, he had an ADATA 240GB SATA SSD. And then when it came to the graphics card, he had an Nvidia Geforce GT 640 2GB. The case was unknown and the power supply was also unknown when he did his video, but he did have a pretty stock looking ACARS cooler for that CPU. Now, when I was watching his video and seeing him announce his specs, I did start to get worried a little bit when I looked at the Intel Core i5-750. Yes, it is a very old CPU now, but it should actually destroy my Phenom 2. But when it came to the graphics card, I thought maybe I had a chance, because the Nvidia Geforce GT 640 2GB is nothing on my RX 460. So I was hoping that my CPU wouldn't cause me enough issues. And to be honest, as we came to the testing, I got even more scared, because when we look at the CPU benchmarks that we did, and by the way, we were using Cinebench R23, it was just the most simplest to use and kind of give us a real world kind of scoring today. I didn't do very well at all. Looking at how well the CPUs compared, running Cinebench R23 with a multi-core test, I managed to get a score of 967, but WnDTech's i5 absolutely destroyed me by getting 1711. That is a significant difference here, which really got me worried about the rest of the results. When it came to the single core score, it was a very similar picture here. I managed to get a score of 361, whereas WnDTech managed to get a score of 491. Again, that is a significant leap here, so he clearly has the stronger CPU. Next up, we had the graphics benchmarks, and for that we decided to go with 3 tests from Unigen. We went with the Sanctuary from 2007, Tropics from 2008, and Heaven from 2009. Most people will know Unigen Heaven because it's a very popular one even today. During these tests, you can see that my RX 460 really pulled ahead here and actually made a massive difference. In Unigen Sanctuary, I managed to get a score of 6,609, whereas WnDTech system only managed to get a score of 1,568. In Tropics, I managed to get a score of 2,697, whereas WnDTech system only managed to get a score of 680. And then we saw a very similar picture in Unigen Heaven, where my system managed to get a score of 1088, but in WnDTech system only managing to score 292. So as far as those tests go, you can clearly see that the Intel-based system was a much more stronger system when it came to CPU performance, but when we actually started to look at the graphics, the RX 460 really did overshadow the Geforce GT 640. That was an expectation that you had, and I was really hoping that my CPU could keep up with that graphics card, and it seemed to do a pretty decent job. The most important tests though are when it comes to the gaming. We only really care about gaming here on my channel in particular, so that was super important to me, and I think my system did exceptionally well. When I actually did the video, we did feature a different game in there, which was one of my favorites from the early 2000s. That was Medal of Honor Pacific Assault. I absolutely love that game, and the system performed exceptionally well on it. That one wasn't actually included within the benchmark tests, but I thought I would actually show you guys it because some of you out there probably have never even heard of it, and I got some great comments on the video from people where it really did bring back that nostalgic view anyway. But when it did come to the actual test that we had to compare, things were a little bit different. The first game that we tested in our test suite was Battlefield 3. In this one, my system clearly won. We managed to get an average of 80 frames per second, where WnDTech only managed to get an average of 21. That was really surprising to me because that game didn't really have that higher specifications. It was the highest specifications or requirement on our actual list, but it wasn't that high, and I expected the GT card to perform much better than that, but at least that's a win for me there. When it came to Crysis, and that is the original Crysis game, my system managed to get an average FPS of 35. That was actually a really poor performance there. I was expecting much more from the RX 460, particularly considering the very low specifications on that game, but clearly my CPU was causing me some issues here. But then WnDTech system only managed to get an average of 27. When it came to Half-Life 2, which will literally run on any potato nowadays, my system managed to get an average of 185 frames per second, which is a fantastic result because that means that you're getting a very high FPS experience here. And WnDTech only managed to get an average of 135. In Just Cause 2, my system managed to get an average of 83 frames per second, whereas WnDTech system only managed to get an average of 37. That was quite shocking to me because I didn't think that the game really needed that much to run. It has a very low requirement, and I expected a little bit more from his system here, but overall, it still meant that the game was quite playable. Quake 3 Arena was a weird one here because for some reason, a WnDTech system kind of capped out at the 91 frames per second, which is kind of built into the engine, whereas for some reason, my system managed to get an average of 387. I think there was an issue with our comparing tests here because we did both have to mod the game, and maybe we used different mods and something went wrong with mine, so I'm probably going to discount my own results here on this one. And then the last game that we tested, which was Return to Castle Wolfenstein, both systems managed to get an average of 91 frames per second. That was actually capping on the engine there, so both systems are more than happy to play that game, which was fantastic too because when I was actually testing that game, I kind of got lost in it a little bit and completed half of it, and it turns out that WnDTech did as well. So if anybody hasn't ever played Return to Castle Wolfenstein, you can be sure that you can pretty much play it on a potato, and it is a great game to play, so just go and play it now. And as we can see from all of the results that we've actually got tested there, WnDTech system with the Intel processor has a much stronger CPU. My system has a much stronger graphics card, but when it actually comes to proper game testing, it's a bit of a mixed bag. Some games run perfectly fine on my system and some games run better on his, but overall, let's take a look at who scored the most points. When it came to scoring these two systems, we decided to go with the most simplest method. For each test that we run, whoever got the highest score would gain 1 point. Whoever has the most points at the end of it will be declared the winner. When it came to the CPU tests in Cinebench, clearly WnDTech won here, so that gained him a couple of points. The graphics tests by the Unigen benchmarks, I got 3 points here because I won every single one of those tests. And then when it came to the gaming tests, things were, like I say, up and down here. For Battlefield 3, I won that one, so I got a point there. For Crysis, I won that one too, so I got a point there. For Half-Life 2, I did manage to get a higher FPS average here, so that's another point for me. And we saw the same on Just Cause 2, where I got another point. Things changed, like I previously said, with Quake 3 Arena. I discounted myself on this one, so that was a point to WnDTech, who managed to get a good 91 frames per second, and that game looked pretty good to play as well at it. And then when it came to Return to Castle Wolfenstein, because we got the same average FPS, which was capping out on the engine, we both got a point there. That brings WnDTech's point total to 4 and mine to 8. So I actually won the competition too. It's no wonder as well, because I actually spent a lot more than WnDTech on my system. We had a budget of £65 to spend, and I actually spent £60 on this, so I had £5 to spare. He only spent around 30. He paid £25 for his original machine, and then £5 for the CPU upgrade. He technically still has a lot in his budget, so maybe we will do a rematch on this. Let me know in the comments below, should we do a rematch? Give a little bit more boost in our budgets and see what I can upgrade on the system to make it faster. Give him the same uplift on the budget, but allow him to use the stuff that, or the funds that he didn't use before, and maybe he can do a crazy upgrade on his system. I'm actually pretty happy that I won this competition, particularly with an all AMD system, because back then they were not that fast at all compared to Intel, but clearly the graphics card in this one, I managed to get a good little combination here because it really did shine when it came to full-on game benchmarks. But anyway, don't forget to subscribe to the channel if you like this kind of content. I'm sure we're going to have lots more competitions going forward. We'll find some more tech tubers to do a bit of collaboration with, and I'm sure we'll revisit something like this with WnDTech in the future. Definitely go check out our original videos. Mine is obviously on the channel, so just go and have a scan through it. I'm sure we'll link it at the end, and so is his. His is on his channel. We'll also link that at the end too, so you can go and watch the actual build processes and see what people really kind of came up with in our thought process at the time. But until then, I'll catch you guys in the next one.